Hey guys, Jay here, welcome to Eons of Battle. Leviathan is out, and I'm sure many of you, myself included, are wondering, what's next? What are those things to buy to get these armies perfectly ready for incursion, for 1,000-point games of Warhammer 40k at 10th edition? Well, I have some ideas that not only are they just awesome models in general, but perfectly synergize and make all the models that come in Leviathan even more fun to play. Starting off with the Tyranid side of the box, the Tyranid army is excellent. I really like every single unit that comes in that box, except for one. There's one little weirdo, there's one odd man out, and that is the Tyranid Prime. It has wings and it has 6 wounds, toughness 5, but it's kinda wimpy. Its weapons are nothing to write home about. They'll deal about 1.5 dead Space Marines a turn. They'll do a decent job at slicing up like some guard equivalent, but everything is good at killing those guys. So for 80 points, it's not expensive, but I don't know if it's an always include in the box. It also can't join anything in the box. And that's the big thing for 10th edition is your leader characters joining units and making them even stronger while making themselves way more survivable because now they have all of these wounds to chew through before you actually get to deal damage to it. It's a really, really cool thing that 10th edition does, and I really like it, and it's really lame that the Prime can't join anything in the Leviathan box. It also can't join anything that would make it better. It can join warriors, but then all of a sudden you can't take advantage of its wings and its 12-inch movement because it can only move as fast as the warriors can move. So it's kind of slowing itself down, not that great an option. Or it can join gargoyle squads, which you can now use your full movement. However, gargoyles don't really want to get into close combat like the Prime does. And so also the gargoyles even have a rule where they can make a move if they're not within engagement range of enemy models. Like they don't want to be in close combat. So between those two options, there's really no great inclusion for the Tyranid Prime. I wonder though, if we're gonna see when that Tyranid Codex comes out, if we're gonna see a brand new warrior box that has options for wings. There used to be a unit in Warhammer 40,000 called the Tyranid Shrike, and it was warriors with wings. And so I would bet when that new Codex comes out, we're gonna see a new Tyranid unit, or a new warriors unit that actually has more weapon options and wings included, and that would become the perfect thing for the Prime to join. And in that case, especially if that warrior squad is cheap enough, or that Shrike squad is cheap enough, then it would be a pretty decent inclusion because it just gives them a little bit of extra punching power and some good like extra buffing. But as it stands, I think the Tyranid Prime could maybe be left out of the list, which would mean that you have a lot of points available because even with the Prime, the Tyranid half of the box comes out to 815 points, which means that there's plenty of room to add things to. And I think that one of the best things to possibly add to your Tyranid army would be Zoanthropes. These weird little Tyranid wormy psychic guys are phenomenal. They're like, you don't read their profile and think like it's the greatest thing in the entire world. However, they have a pretty good shooting weapon that's about 5 attacks leading to many dead Space Marines a turn. And they have an alternate attack option, which is las cannons. 3 las cannons hitting on 3 ups, which is remarkably good for the Tyranids. It's an excellent little unit, only costing 90 points. And if you don't take the Tyranid Prime, you could probably get 2 squads of 3 in there. And that's what I'm doing. 2 squads of 3 Zoanthropes, I think would be an excellent, excellent inclusion. And it gives you some really good anti-armor because currently out of the Leviathan box, the only thing giving you any real anti-armor is the Screamer Killer Carnifex. And he's pretty slow. He's got to march his way all the way up the board. If your opponent is pretty clever, maybe they have some indirect fire that can slow them down. It's not a sure thing. And in those 1,000-point games, having a good amount of anti-armor can really make the difference because if they have a big old tank that you can't deal with in 1,000 points, they might just get to literally roll all over you. So you definitely want some anti-armor, and I think the Zoanthropes would be a perfect way to do that. However, there's one more unit that the Tyranids have access to that I also think would synergize really, really well, and that is the Biovores. Another sleeper hit from the Tyranid Codex, but I think that they synergize perfectly with the Psychophage. The Psychophage has a special ability where it can hit on 2 ups if it is attacking units that are not at full strength. And the easiest way to get those guys to full strength without like throwing your Von Ryan's Leapers or something, because then they get stuck in close combat and you don't want to shoot into that close combat. In fact, you're not allowed to. But If your biovores are just picking off little guys here and there, maybe over the course of turn 1 and 2, they can like take 1 or 2 guys out of each squad, all of a sudden your Psychophage is perfectly set up to charge in and deal some serious damage hitting on 2 ups in close combat. Beautiful. And not only that, but the biovores have access to a secondary firing profile. They can take spore mines and just put them on the battlefield. And the spore mines are pretty lame. They're not very good. Objective control 0, literally 7-up saves. Like 7-up saves like the beverage. They are nothing, and if anything looks at them, they're dead. However, if anything walks near them and ends their turn within 3 inches, they get dealt a mortal wound. Mortal wounds are very good, especially for dealing with heavy armor, because it just bypasses everything and goes right to the damage. And models cannot start or end advance rolls within 6 inches of them. So all of a sudden, you can really kind of control the battlefield in a really annoying way for your opponents, where they have to make these decisions of, do I waste my shooting attacks at this worthless unit, or do I just deal with it and try to move around them, try to move through them, not get to advance? Because remember, if you get turn 1, or even if you're doing turn 2 into turn 3, your opponent is not going to get to shoot away the spores before they have to decide how they want to move and advance. So all of a sudden, they have to either not advance, which can be really good, especially if you want to make sure that you get up the board a little faster than they get up the board to claim some of those objectives. The spore mines do a really good job of just messing everything up and ruining the game plan of your opponents, which is really good because all of your army is just foot slogging dudes, and you need the time to get them where they want to be. And I think spore mines would be an excellent way to just try to make sure that everything goes your way. I think those units, especially if you ditch the Prime and bring in 2 squads of Zoanthropes, I think that would be the perfect way to run these Leviathan Tyranids to victory. I'm super excited to play with these guys. They're really, really fun. And it's not that many more units. There's like 200 extra points that you need to fill out, but just a bunch of little 40mm monsters. Absolutely love it. Now, the Space Marines, on the other hand, are a little bit trickier because they are actually at 980 points right out of the box. So a full 1,000-point army. However, not an exceptional 1,000-point Space Marine army, in my opinion. There's a few units that I don't necessarily love, or that I don't think are necessary in every single game you play at 1,000 points. The big unit that I'm not really feeling, is the Lieutenant with Combi Weapon. The Lieutenant with Combi Weapon is fine, but for a Lieutenant that costs a significant amount more than your average Lieutenant at 80 points, I don't find him that great. He has lone operative, so he can't join other squads, and instead kind of just runs around the battlefield. And sure, nothing can shoot at him within 12 inches, but is one Space Marine running around really that big a deal? He also has a special rule where he can run away, which is kind of interesting, but do you want to spend 80 points on a guy who's just running away? You probably want to spend your points on something that's going to make your guys even tougher or stronger or shoot better, instead of just one guy just kind of running circles around the enemy. And with objective control 1, it's not like he's really going to be contesting any objectives. So I would say you should probably proxy him as another unit that is basically identical, and that is Lieutenant in Phobos armor. For only 60 points, I think it is an absolute steal, and he has some rules that go along really well with another model that I'm going to talk about, the next purchase for the Space Marines. But it's like the same model. The only difference is the combi weapon, and it's not even in his hand, it's glued to his butt. So just yank that sucker off and glue a bolter to his butt, and all of a sudden you have a Lieutenant in Phobos armory, and you've saved yourself 20 points of list building. I think that is a much better choice, and that's probably how I'm going to be running my guy, because I don't know, the lone operative is kind of interesting, but if I want a lone operative, I'm probably bringing a Vindicar Assassin, not that guy. Vindicar Assassin is only 10 more points too, and he's way better. The first unit that I would add to this Space Marine force is some Incursor Space Marines. These guys have never really been phenomenal, but I think a squad of 5 of them synergizes really well with the Leviathan Space Marines, and that is because they have the ability to use their bolt guns and tag enemy units, and all of a sudden give everything else in your army, particularly the Ballistus Dreadnought, 2-ups to hit. And if you include that Phobos Lieutenant in that squad of Incursors, they have the fade back rule, and so all of a sudden you can take those Incursors, run them out from behind cover, shoot something, and then run them back behind cover, because then they get to make a normal move after they have shot. And now your Ballistus Dreadnought is hitting on 2 ups of whatever it's shooting at. Beautiful, absolutely lovely unit. It's 5 Space Marines, so decently tough and has some ability for objective control, unlike the other lieutenant with combi weapon that's gonna remain nameless. But I think that the Phobos would be excellent. And Phoboses come in boxes of 10, but a squad of 5 is 90, which is pretty good for being included in this army. Might as well build the other 5 as infiltrators, because they also have a really saucy special rule where nothing can deep strike or reinforce within 24-inch bubble of them. Pretty darn solid, considering how every single codex has tons of things that can deep strike and deep strike and reinforce. So making sure that you can just section off an entire big chunk of the board, making sure that you are in control of that area and nobody else can really sneak in, is really good. I don't know if I'm gonna be including both Incursors and Infiltrators in a 1,000-point game. I think I'd really go with the Incursors, but the Infiltrators are also a very interesting unit. And not only do the Infiltrators have the move, shoot, and then hide away rule, but they also have a Haywire Grenade or Haywire Mine, which is 2d3 mortal wounds to enemy vehicles, which is again a super strong little bit of anti-armor in your Leviathan box, which doesn't really have that much anti-armor except for the Ballistus Dreadnought. So just whipping those guys out there, tagging a unit, maybe throw that grenade too, and then take away half the wounds of an enemy tank. The Ballistus Dreadnought now hitting on 2s, finishing it off. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Incursor Space Marines, 5-man squad, 90 points. Absolutely loving it. So now you've got the anti-armor kind of taken care of, but what else can you do to make your Leviathan Space Marines even better? Well, I have been looking at the Flamethrower Marines, and they're pretty darn awesome. They can absolutely torch any sort of infantry squad pretty much in the game. However, the tricky part is they need to actually get there. They need to get where they're going, and foot slogging, I feel like, is just not the answer. Luckily, drop pods are only 70 points. 70 points for a drop pod full of flamethrowers is absolutely amazing. Slam that sucker down into the ground, 9 inches away from your enemy deployment zone. Open up those flower petal doors and let the flamethrowers walk out. Torch everything you can absolutely reach. Maybe even spend a stratagem to Overwatch 2 in your enemy's turn. And they're gonna die. They're probably gonna die. I mean, they might not if they manage to pull off enough flamethrower firepower, but that is what I'd want to do with those guys, because even though you're losing a little bit of objective control by throwing them out, I mean, there might be an objective out there. So maybe they flamethrower or something and then try to hop onto the objective with whoever survives the oncoming firepower of your enemy's army. But drop pod would be an excellent inclusion. Now, how are you gonna get that drop pod into the list? Because we've already added Incursors, we're already way over the maximum 1,000-point limit. Well, I would say that you don't really need a Terminator Librarian and a Terminator Captain. They're both excellent models, but you can only fit one of those guys into your 5-man Terminator squad. So, and neither one of them is really good enough or survivable enough to just go it on their own and just march up the board without a unit to attach to. And they're Terminators. They're really slow. They do have teleportation, so there could be some fun, interesting game-makiness of teleporting them somewhere on the board, maybe near an objective. But just one dude standing there, I don't think is gonna make as much of a difference as a drop pod for your flamethrower guys. So I would say in a 1,000-point battle, either bring the Captain attached to your Terminators or the Librarian attached to your Terminators, and then leave the other one just off to the side. You're gonna get to play a lot of games of 10th edition. You can swap them in and out. You can see which one you prefer. I think I'm leaning towards the Librarian, although I will never do that because I'm a Black Templar player. So if I'm gonna be bringing anything with our Terminators, it'll probably be the Captain. And speaking of getting more points into your 1,000-point list, the Apothecary Biologus. Kind of a lame sauce unit. Very similar to the Tyranid Prime, it doesn't really have a great option to join, or actually it doesn't have anything to join in with in the box. And it is in Gravis armor, so it can only be attached to Gravis units. However, its special ability only goes off if your Gravis units have killed something in close combat. Your Gravis units aren't really gonna kill a lot of things in close combat. Maybe aggressors with their discount power fists, but really you're probably gonna be spending those guys most of the time on shooting and camping objectives, not charging and getting into close combat. So the biologus currently doesn't have any real synergy with the Force. If you run him just as a normal Space Marine Apothecary, which is an excellent model, there's definitely something to that, and it's a similar points cost, but I would say probably leave out the Apothecary Biologus in favor of the Drop Pod and the Incursors, because, they're just so good. And if you do that, you'll still have about 25 points left over to spend on enhancements. Probably Bolter Discipline, although it will be a little bit redundant if you're bringing the Librarian, because he already gives the buff to the Terminators. Those Terminators are all of a sudden going to be mortal wounding on 5s and 6s, so there's definitely something to that. Everything in the Leviathan box except for the Apothecary Biologus and either the Terminator or the Terminator Captain or the Terminator Librarian, Drop Pod, Incursors, actually being able to take out some vehicles, mortal wounds all over the place, drop podding flamethrowers. Just those 2 little units, I think, do an excellent job of making those units even better. I think there is only one thing in the whole world that I'm more excited for than running these 2 armies on the tabletop, and that would be our Patreon. Over there, we have a new STL terrain set every single month. This month, we have the Hive Colony, a monstrous terrain set full of disgusting alien organisms. We also make one extra episode of Eons of Battle every single week where we take a look at our viewers' miniatures and give some ideas and critiques of how to improve their painting. We host live Discord hangouts, and we have a tier where you can get your name on one of my Black Templar Space Marines, probably one of those Space Marines from the new Leviathan box. And speaking of that Leviathan box, we maybe have 1 or 2. And if you want to see what we're doing with those, you're gonna have to tune in to this week's Wednesday video where you might see both of us painting them up. Thanks for watching.